Ultimate Masters draft for you here from Grand Prix Prague, happening at Magic Fest in Prague here, early 2019. We're going to get a chance to jump back down to our feature match draft, where we have the draft of Mark Tobias just kicking off here. Tobias picked up just a single loss in that last featured draft that we saw him in, where he went green-white heroic. Let's see whether or not he wants to do something similar in this second draft, as we see quite a few good cards in here. Straightforward Last Gasp is a solid removal spell. Vengeful Rebirth, if he wants to go with what we're now going to dub the Viren style of drafting. Or you've got a straightforward Young Pyromancer that just makes all of your spells that much better, and that seems to be the one that he's leaning toward at the moment.
Yeah, this is a pretty powerful pack. Young Pyromancer does not commit you to any specific deck, although it's much better in a blue-red spell deck.
But yeah, if you end up in just being a red aggro deck of any description, chances are it's going to be a solid body that you don't mind having in there. It fits neatly on the curve, and as soon as you do cast almost any spell, it gets very exciting indeed.
Yeah, with Molten Birth, for example, if you go for tokens,
oh yeah,
get 3 tokens, 3 goblins every time. No, 2 goblins and 1 elemental every time.
Ooh, Fire Ice. If we're talking about the red-blue deck, that seems like a little bit of a combo there. Crown Crusader is an interesting one if you want to be red-white tokens.
I think Fire Ice is a pretty safe pick here. I mean, if you start with a Pyromancer, you don't know if you're going to be red, blue, red something. The red, blue is...
You're pretty confident that you're red.
Yeah, the red, blue is preferable. You'd rather go red, blue. But if you pick Fire Ice and you don't end up in blue, you still get the fire.
And the fire half, very potent indeed. Either half will, of course, trigger Young Pyromancer. This one also potentially killing 1 or 2 things on the other side of the table, or indeed, you know, maybe just your opponent. Sometimes they're just at 2 and you just get them. Tobias was the German national captain and is doing very nicely for himself here in Prague. Well, there's a treasure cruise. We know at least one person at the table that likes the treasure cruises. Basking Root Waller, potentially a nice one if you end up in the more madness-related decks, though it must be said that finding the right outlets for madness can sometimes be a little fiddly.
Yeah, I think Treasure Cruise is the pick here, but since we believe the Treasure Cruise actually got to the other player.
Oh, was this the pack that
yeah, it could
we were
be.
like, how did Treasure Cruise get that far? Because Mark Tobias, I
Yep.
believe that he was in... So Tobias is in seat 2 and Huschenbeth was in seat 6. So, yeah, I think that here we see Mark going in a different direction. Okay, another Treasure Cruise and a Become Immense here. So this is kind of the aggro side of things, and Become Immense representing a lot of damage when it gets through. And in some respects, the way that this can end up going is you take the cards that either let you have a slow game where you do powerful things, or you take the cards that let you have a fast game where you punish the people that are trying to be doing powerful things. And this time around, Mark Tobias, again, going for the more aggressive angle. He takes the Become Immense here, so he's beginning to settle himself into a deck that can potentially be quite punishing with what it's doing. So Anger could be very good in this deck in a way that it simply wouldn't have been in the last deck that we saw. Soul's Fire, a straightforward source of damage.
Pretty good with Become Immense.
Yeah, absolutely. All you need is a big creature in play, and red-green, it's got a few of them. Takes the Soul's Fire. He's passing a few good ones here. Almost inevitable when it comes to Ultimate Masters. You're not going to be able to take all of the good cards that come your way.
Yeah, Soul's Fire is a common that could arrive a little later in the draft. So maybe Anger was also in consideration.
Pulse Marassa, Lab Maniac in this pack. Generator Servant is a straightforward one if you want a sort of low to the ground creature, but it's not a super exciting one. There is Illumox Crusher in this pack if you think that you're going to be able to get up to those higher levels of mana. Goes for the Pulse Marassa here.
Pulse has been picked remarkably high in the draft we covered. I mean, they like the pulses, these guys.
Raid Bombardment, a tricky source of damage. Fulminator Mage, an interesting one. Not so many non-basics necessarily being played here. Raid Bombardment is a really interesting one when it comes to the aggro lists. When you've already got that young Pyromancer, it gets to look a lot more exciting because you know that you're going to have the small creatures attacking and you get to just get that extra damage in on your opponents.
So we take Molten Birth at any rate at this point?
Pretty much. Spark Splitter, another source of lots of damage, but Prey Upon could be a solid removal spell here also. Cathodian,
Creatures
a
are
good
pretty
old safe
small.
one.
Creatures are pretty small so far.
Yeah. I mean, this seems like more of a go wide red-green deck than a go big red-green deck, but there's still a lot of time, of course, in this draft. Take the Prey Upon. Let's see what we have coming along here. Nightbird's Clutch is a great way of potentially forcing through damage. Another Prey Upon we like. Double Cleave, not completely out of contention for doing a bit of damage here. Nightbird's Clutches, though, does very much clear a path. A spell with Flashback that will obviously do good work with Young Pyromancer. I like where this is going for Mark Tobiash. It's not a fanciful deck. It's not trying to do anything overly complicated, but what it's doing, it seems to be doing fairly well.
Also, the Clutches. Note that it can target up to 2 creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have, for example, the Necron Crusader and a Defender, you can trigger both of the heroic.
Yeah, I mean, Storch-Hearted Warrior here, another heroic
the
creature.
Warrior, not Defender. Storch-Hearted Warrior.
Yeah.
So that's what I was talking about. Like with the Clutch, he can
just
trigger
make them
both the heroic.
If they're attacking, they don't care that they're not blocking. And here's Furnace Celebration, pretty much as a freebie late in this pack. We mentioned that it is a tricky card to build around. It's probably not even likely to make his deck, but if something strange happens, if he finds himself with a couple of Magmors, then it may be that he makes a spot adjustment there. Undying Rage, a nice one for his heroes. Yeah, I like where this is going for Mark.
This is a lot more straightforward than that one Arn show, and it feels like that's exactly what Arn was looking for. He was going for a green-red. It didn't go exactly the way he wanted, but I think that's exactly the deck he wanted to draft.
Yeah, I mean, this deck has a very clear plan. There's already a good curve of creatures beginning to form in Mark Tobiash's hands. The spells that he has are very solid, and if we talked about kind of setup and payoff cards, there were a lot of setup cards picked in our last draft. This one, Young Pyromancer, it's not a big payoff, but it's a straightforward card that will get things done here. And even if it works out that Mark Tobiash just has a low curve of creatures plus some aggressive spells to help him push through damage, he has if you ask him what his plan is to win the game, it's already mapped out on his cards to some extent.
So the problem with this deck is to find creatures to play with. So for now he has 4 creatures, he has a lot of spells, he has pump spells, but can't really attack yet. There's still 2 packs to go, and I'm pretty sure that's what he wants to pick up, and most likely small creatures or like Wild Mongrel-like creatures.
Wild Mongrel will be great. I mean, once you've got the Wild Mongrel, all of a sudden Reckless Worm starts looking a lot more attractive also. I mean, a 5-mana 4/4 Trampler is not the end of the world at all for this deck, but much more exciting when you're able to use it to its full effect. Hissing Iguana, a nice one, especially with the likes of that Young Pyromancer. And the choice between the Hissing Iguana and the Staunch-Hearted Warrior is kind of an interesting one. One's cheaper. One works very well when you go super wide. The other one lets you profit off throwing a few extra targeted effects. And goes for the Iguana here. There always used to be a thing that Martin User used to say, that if you're ever not quite sure between 2 picks in draft, if you go for the cheaper one, it means that you can just be aggressive and get people. And it looks like that's the direction that Mark Tobiash is going with here.
Yeah, you don't want to end up with too many 4 drops, especially in the deck with so many pump spells. You will have other warriors in this draft.
Kadama's Reach, potentially way of accelerating out a few bits and pieces, though it's not quite clear what he'll be accelerating into. A Chrome Crusader, though, that's a nice way of getting more tokens on the board. They'll work nicely with Hissing Iguana.
And the Raid Bombardment.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's not a super high impact card, but it may well be the thing that he needs here.
9 with Clutch. Nightbird's Clutch. You can
and the tokens that are made, they have
target
haste.
it, make a creature not block and attack with the token and the Crusader
Yeah, just sort of gradually piece it together.
and whatever you have next to it.
Different kind of set of synergies being looked here for Mark Tobias here. And the good thing about being a straightforward two-color deck as well is that when Mark goes through these packs, in some respects, there are fewer cards for him to have to really consider in a substantial way. He can look past the options that are not in red and green unless they're obvious huge bombs. Staunch-Hearted Warrior here.
It's a pretty interesting pick here because the Staunch-Hearted Warrior and Brawn, and remember he has a +6/+6 become immense.
Brawn definitely helps that one.
Yeah.
I guess the question is how easily can he get Brawn into his graveyard right now? And he
Just
doesn't-
as a 3/3 trample, it's still fine.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Goes for the Warrior, though. There's some pretty substantial upside on the Warrior when things get going for it. And next up, what do we have? Double Cleave has some potential. Satyr Wayfinder, Boar Umbra, and a Soul's Fire and a Raid Bombardment. So if you're Mark Tobias here, firstly there's the choice of what to pick, but also looking at this pack, there's a potential to get something back on the wheel here.
I think it's a little optimistic. The
Goes
Boar
for the
Umbra is
Boar
probably
Umbra.
the best card. Satyr Wayfinder is not exactly what you want in this deck. It doesn't really have payoffs from.
Yeah, I
going
guess
to the
that's
graveyard.
fair. Yeah, he's not. I mean, there's a few cards that he may end up with flashback, but it's mainly just about getting as much value on the front end as he can.
I mean, Boar Umbra on the Acorn Crusader is great. Oh, Molten Birth. That's
Molten Birth is
one of the
a
cards
nice
he
one.
wants. There's also a Marauder as well.
Rakdos Shredfreak, if you can reliably cast it onto, is okay. It's one of those cards that is a role filler. If you're in a black-red aggro deck, then it goes up a little bit because it's so easy to cast. But Molten Birth here, make some tokens, and then maybe get it back to make even more tokens. 3 mana for 2/1/1s is not the end of the world. As soon as you're doing anything more than that, well, it's
a lot of good.
great.
There's a lot of good combos in this deck with the Young Pyromancer, with the Raid Bombardment.
Wickerbow Elder, pretty good. Soul's Fire, also a nice one, though. Worth noting that we've not really seen the gigantic creatures that make Soul's Fire as a sort of super scary addition.
Yeah, I think he's gonna settle for the Elder. I mean, he already has a lot of spells, and not a lot of creatures yet. Yeah.
Yeah, get that Elder in the pile. The incidental artifact and enchantment removal occasionally helpful, and the rest of the time, not the worst of bodies. Another Nightbird's Clutches, a Hero of Lena Tower there. That a nice one drop that can get targeted and potentially create a big old body.
Also with the Elder, he has 2 Undying Rage, Undying
Mhm.
Fury.
Undying Fury.
Undying Fury. So he can remove a -1/-1 counter,
Get rid of it. It
get
goes
rid
back
of
to
it,
hand,
and
retarget.
just move it to something else. Maybe a heroic creature,
Conflagrate potential there for that one.
Conquer Abomination.
Canker Abomination is occasionally a very large creature. Conflagrate might be the burn spell that finishes the game.
It's not the kind of deck that really takes advantage of Conflagrate.
Yeah, he's not going to have tons of cards in hand or tons of mana, so lets that one pass along. Potentially getting a big old Canker Abomination, which, if it does come into play as a large creature, will work very nicely with some of his Soul's Fires. And Soul's Fire with Staunch-Hearted Warrior, we must remember, will often be a lot of damage.
Yeah. So his curve so far is a little high. He has about 4 or 5 4-drops, and not too much under that. And most of his spells are 3 mana as well. So I'm a little worried about how he's going to manage to deal with the early game. And once he gets to the mid game, and he's going to try to push damage through his creatures, he will have let his opponent. He would have given enough time to his opponent to find removal.
So Rakdos Shredfreak and Spider Umbra are the only real interesting cards here, and he does need creatures, so goes for the Shredfreak in this instance. At this point, it fits the good enough category.
I mean, he has 1-drops.
Yes.
And he has 1 or 2 2-drops. He has Young
Yeah.
Pyromancer and Does he have anything else? We'll see soon enough.
We certainly will. He's got that double cleave there and picks it up late. Not a guaranteed inclusion, but another Ragdoll Shred Freak actually might prove to be one that does make the cut, just making sure that he ends up with enough playables at every point on the curve. It's not just about having the power late game for this sort of deck, because getting in damage early will be an important element if he's going to be winning games, just so he doesn't have to rely on his 4 or 5 drops being able to do everything that he needs.
I mean, how much green does he actually have? He could just be splashing green for the 4 drops.
Because there's a few Staunch Hunted Warriors who will be doing good work here. The Boar Umbra we like.
Like, you can play like 12 and 5 or 11 and 6. Or maybe
the Hero of Lena Tower changes things a little bit, because that is one that, while it's certainly not a bust if you cast it in the late game, getting it into play early is nice, though it doesn't work too neatly with those Shred Freaks. The Shred Freaks get a little complicated on the mana.
I mean, the hero could also be a late game. I mean, at 1, you're gonna attack once or twice, and that's it. It gets really good when you can play Undying Fury on it and pay mana.
Oh yeah.
So it's not exactly too bad if you can't cast it on turn 1.
Undying Rage. Sorry,
Undying Rage. Yes.
There we go.
It's
angry, undeath.
Because he actually wants to be able to cast his 2/1 haste on turn 2, more than playing the hero on turn 1.
Yep, I would say that's fair. And I guess the good thing for Mark Tobiashi here, he's been good at pivoting around based on what's been happening in the draft thus far, recognizing what it is that he needs. Because after pack 1, we were saying things looking a little tough on creatures. His creature base is definitely solidifying here as we go into our 3rd pack.
Well, they're not the best creatures, but they're creatures nobody wants. No one wants the 2/1 haste.
Yeah, he picked up those Shred Freaks at essentially no cost whatsoever, and that's one of the things in draft. It's kind of a big equity decision. Like, if you want to first pick things, you can get anything, but you're only ever going to get 3 first picks per draft. What can you do in the later picks in the draft? And here we see that there's a few good options available here. Another Crusader is interesting. Raid Bombardment potentially at some point later on in the draft. Another Become Immense represents potentially a lot of damage. I mean, we know that there's a lot of Treasure Cruises in this draft. They're not really going to trouble Mark Tobiashi's deck all too terribly much.
So Crusader or a Become Immense? Second Become Immense is I think it's huge.
Yeah, you end up just being kind of a burn deck. The Become Immense represents so much damage.
I like it. Double Cleave as well.
Oof.
Teamer Battle Rage, Become Immense.
You don't need it, but if it happens, it's obviously lovely. And Become Immense means that because his is a deck that can potentially end up creating lots of 1/1 tokens, it becomes very difficult for your opponent to reliably get to the point where they're blocking everything and can't get Become Immense out. Vengeful Rebirth. This one, of course, getting back a Become Immense is a 6-point burn spell for 6 mana, which is, 6 mana is a lot for this deck. Yeah. It's a fairly low curve that it's working with, but 1 Vengeful Rebirth to top out the curve might not be the end of the world.
That Brawn earlier in the draft, 2 Become Immense, and Double Cleave.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going here. This is,
he has the Warriors already. He has 2 or 3 already. One of them being a Brawn, that would have been so good.
I think I kind of like this Vengeful Rebirth at the top of the curve. We'll see what the rest of this pack gives him. Brawn would have been an interesting one. Angel of Despair, that's for someone else, but Fire Ice might very well be the pick here for Mark Tobiash. Between it and Solitaire Wayfinder, I feel like Fire Ice, it's just such a quality removal spell. Basically we're talking about fire here at this point. Ice is not really a big consideration.
Also, it targets 2. It can target 2.
If you got 2 Staunch Hunted Warriors, you go, yep. You know what? They can each take 1 damage, but they get 2+1/+1 counters. I will make that.
It's 2 mana +4/+4.
Yeah. Combo people out that way. I like it. He has a lot of copies of those Staunch Hunted Warriors that he can work with. So, yeah, I like that synergy quite a bit. There's a Magmor. And a Magmor does work pretty well in his deck. Terramorphic Expanse also a consideration.
Also pretty good. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of ways to put cards in his graveyard, so Terramorphic Expanse is pretty much free. And would fix his mana that's not going to be that good. I mean, he has double red on turn 2 and a 1 mana green spell, so...
Takes the Magmor here. I mean, the Magmor does give him an additional source of those final points of damage when he's got lots of tokens. If he discovers that one of his creatures has a Faith's Fetters on it or something, he can work with that. Seismic Assault. It's a lot of damage, or you can just go for the more straightforward Brazen Scourge 3 mana 3/3 haster. Thermo Alchemist might be vaguely interesting. He's got a fair amount of spells.
Yeah, but he has also a lot of pump spells. So you don't really want to go Thermo Alchemist, Joe become immense, and not be able to attack.
Brazen Scourge gives his deck a little bit more reach. His is a very reachy deck, all told. And we're not talking here about being able to block flyers. We're talking about being able to find surprise damage to close out games once you've done the first few points.
Like Richie Hagen.
Yes. Okay. Another Akroan Crusader. Torch-Hearted Warrior also in the pack, but at some point Curve Concern become a thing.
That's enough. I think we've had enough Stormheart Warrior. 3's enough.
3's a happy number. At 4, our curve starts to look more like a bump.
Yeah, how many lands are you going to play in this deck? I mean, 3 Akroan Crusaders.
Ooh, an Arena Athlete. Don't mind adding that to the team.
There's also an Explosives. While Arena Athlete is good, Explosives is really good against you.
There's been a couple of copies of Engineered Explosives in this draft. I mean, this is not a Magic Online draft. It's not an Arena draft. This is one where every card that's being passed will be being passed to a potential opponent. Arena Athlete making it so blocking a little trickier. Another Soulsfire, a consideration here.
Yeah, he could be playing Mono Red. Mono Red Splash become immense.
Oof. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Soulsfire all of my warriors. I kind of like it. There's not so many instant speed removal spells that are going to make your life sad on that, and you can normally see them coming a little ways off.
Red Bombardment directly put him in on the front of the pile.
So 2 Raid Bombardments now in Mark Tobiashi's pile.
Yeah, and 3 Akroan Crusaders.
He could be really close to being mono red.
Yeah.
This is what happens when some people at the table are trying to be as speculative as possible. The people that go the other direction might just be able to sneak in underneath and get in an awful lot of damage here, as Mark Tobiash with the Spark Spitter is getting closer and closer to that mono-red dream. Discarding a card, not necessarily the end of the world for him, as he is going to potentially be able to set up going for the Become Immense more easily. At this point he says, you know what, these Goyo's Vengeances, they've been rattling around the table. It's not going to be a big concern for him in terms of casting it, but let's not let other people have that fun for themselves either. Yeah,
I'm excited to see how the deck ends up.
Prey upon here, a late pickup. You never know. Works all right with those warriors.
I mean, Spider Umbra would have been pretty good with the Crusaders as well.
Let's take this Rise from the Tides just so that someone else doesn't have it. I mean, I guess in principle, if there was a Terramorphic Expanse in his pile, then, you know, these Ices plus Rise from the Tides, maybe. But, all right, fine. We'll take another Staunch-Hearted Warrior. Maybe that's actually the real plan.
Then before 5.
And
oh, wow. That
a last pick Malevolent Whisters, it's not impossible that he would find a use for that. Maybe not in the main deck, but somewhere within his sideboard plans at least. There might be decks that maybe a Reanimator deck that puts into play a big threat and he gets to just take it and end the game that way. Really excited to see how that one ends up playing out, because there's definitely a very clear plan and a lot of power in Mark Tobiash's deck. We will get a chance to have a look at the third drafter, and if anything, the one that had the scariest deck in the last draft, that our undefeated player Pascal Viren. Very shortly, it's going to be Frank and Matei with the third draft of the day after these messages.